New Buddhaware Dhamma Talks. Geoff Hunt presents a talk on some aspect of the Buddha's teaching.
What is it that is to be cultivated and what is not to be cultivated? Well, in short, the answer is what is wholesome is to be cultivated. What tends to wholesome states of mind is to be cultivated, and what tends to unwholesome states of mind is not to be cultivated. But then the question, of course, is what do we mean by wholesome? Well, the Buddha is an instructor in meditation, and the point of the meditation is to gain wisdom and insight into the true nature of things, and that is all it is teaching. And for him, meditation is the antidote to our root suffering, our delusional suffering. What is to be cultivated are wholesome states of mind, that is, whatever is conducive to our wisdom, our peace. And what is to be avoided, what is not to be cultivated, whatever hinders it or actually does the opposite and drags us down towards a troubled state of mind and a lack of peace in our lives, and, not to mince words, foolishness. Buddha doesn't mince words, and he does use the word fool and foolishness from time to time. States of mind, well, what is to be cultivated are states of mind that are conducive to our peace and our liberation from dissatisfaction and suffering. What states of mind? Well, generosity, kindness, gratitude, compassion, kindliness. And what states of mind are not to be cultivated? Well, anything which hinders the ones I've just mentioned, and anything which is actually the opposite. So greed, hatred, cruelty, negligence, indifference, cynicism, all of these things are states of mind which are not to be cultivated. We can talk about this in a moment. The next thing to think about is the things to be cultivated which are important for us in our society very often have to do with my ego, my identity, my self-worth, my self-importance. Of course, the Buddha did not use the word ego. That came into play with Sigmund Freud. And the word he uses is often self, or individuality, or I. The self, or the sense that I am a separate, independent being. Right? The Buddha says that if you look, you will not find such a thing. You will find something, but it is deeply intermeshed with everything else. So it's like how one wave is connected with other waves. The wave isn't separate, but that's not to say that a wave isn't an identifiable thing. But if a wave were to think of itself as an independent and separate thing, then it would be deluding itself. And that's what we do. We think we are separate, independent things, and that the world is out there for us to manipulate and to gain things from. So this is what the Buddha calls the root delusion. So what is to be cultivated is, despite what our society says, actually the opposite. Not assertiveness, but humility. Doesn't sound very fashionable at the present time, but he says if you want to have peace, then think about being more humble or modest or moderate, rather than trying to fill yourself with pride, self-importance, manipulate others, treat others with disrespect, treat nature with disrespect. All of this will lead to trouble for you and for everyone else and for nature at large. So we actually need to understand our interdependence and deal with the delusion of independence. So what is to be cultivated then is an interdependent feeling, connectedness, compassion, our embeddedness in everything around us. What is not to be cultivated is what our society actually champions, which is to be assertive, to be prideful, to gain as much as you can, to use others where you can, to get ahead, to be successful. The third one is craving, desire, especially sensual desire, that these are things which lead, again, he says, these are the things that generally will lead to trouble. The least we can do as lay people is keep them in some sort of proportion and not get carried away, because all around us we see the huge destructiveness caused by attachment and clinging to sensual desire, whether it's drugs, alcohol, pornography, eating too much sugar, anything that gives us sensual delight. We as human beings all seem to be hardwired to go for it. The evidence of what is going on around us is screaming at us that these are destructive things when we take them much too far. They can turn into good things. Well, some of them can anyway. I'm not saying heroin or cocaine or pornography could turn into a good thing, but I think you see what I mean, is that it's when things get out of balance and become obsessive that the trouble really starts, and they do cause and have caused throughout history so much trouble. So the Buddha is asking really, can we move beyond that? And he thinks there is only one way, and that is through self-awareness, self-questioning, self-understanding, which involves some work. Okay? But it is possible, because as humans we have that potential. So what is to be cultivated? What is not to be cultivated? What is to be cultivated is states of mind such as generosity, which are conducive to our peace, greater humility and sharing rather than egoism, and keeping sensual desire in its place, not letting it get the upper hand, let alone become the main purpose of life, which does happen all too often. Would anyone like to comment on whether it's what he says is true or untrue? Is this just wishful thinking, idealism, and utopianism?
There's an element that I find sometimes a little difficult, which is, for example, the assertiveness or the individuality, or we've been brought up to encourage our kids to be themselves and not follow the crowd. So the whole idea of self is encouraged as a good thing.
Teenage males and all the negatives that have been listed are their badges and the things that give them worth within their group, and that is often supported by older males as well. I mean, we've only got to visit. I used to live in Woking. I sometimes go into Guildford socially, maybe for a meal. And Guildford on Saturday night has changed unbelievably, where the idea of the sensory overload, so that could be from music to promoting your sexuality in the most prolific way that you can. I'm saddened when I see young women wearing a t-shirt with the word porn star written on it, as though that's potentially now a career move, who are also incredibly drunk, and so are their boyfriends, and everyone's slipping around in a sea of vomit. Reminds me of those Hogarth pictures of sort of London when everyone was drowning, when the working classes were drowning in gin, and it just seems such a powerful culture that's going on, where the list of non-cultivating sort of attributes for humans are just seem to be growing around us.
So things have got very much out of balance.
They have.
Does it help to have teachers, community, ideas which are moving against that tide?
Oh, definitely. I think we've also got into a situation with our young people where school now is only about academic achievement only, and those are badges, and if you don't have those academic badges, then it's quite likely that you will feel a failure. But if we measured young people not on their academia, but measured them on the positive aspects that the Buddha was talking about, the things perhaps to cultivate, we'd have, I believe, a richer society.
It's an interesting thing, though. We're seeing a terrific growth of interest in mindfulness, not just amongst the general population, but in quite high circles in professional life, in schools, even in government circles. But I think it's a kind of recognition that we cannot continue in the direction that we're going in, because self-destruction is just looming on the horizon. There's got to be another way. The nature of economic growth and competition and globalization is such that those who are lucky enough to work are put under tremendous stress. And those who are not working are under the stress of not being able to earn their own living. So the stress levels are very high. It is evident to increasing numbers of people that alcohol, drugs, etc. are not the way to deal with that. So people are looking for something else, and perhaps a different way of life, a different outlook. And that is why mindfulness and perhaps Buddhism are being explored now by people in ways that would have seemed inconceivable only 10, 15 years ago.
There is and I know we've had this topic before about how mindfulness is appearing in everywhere from corporate training to schools and colleges.
Yeah, recently I've been asked to talk to professionals in the health service and to police officers who are under tremendous stress. You see, when we talk about these things, about mindfulness now being attractive or explored in ways we might not have expected, by people we might not have expected, isn't that a recognition that this is to be cultivated? And that is not.
Almost, yes, it does.
But sometimes in these organisations which might be trying to cultivate mindfulness, you wonder how well they're applying it. Because in those organisations you suggested, like the NHS, often it's about ticking boxes and cutting costs and getting things more and more cheaply, using less and less people. And in the police service, I suppose, if you're a good policeman, you're ambitious to progress in the ranks. And they seem again at odds. Ambition on the one hand, but mindfulness on the other, which is trying to cultivate the compassion and the loving kindness and the other qualities that Buddha talks about.
I agree with you that, and this is what you'd expect, isn't it? If you bring something like mindfulness into a completely new context, the danger is that the context is going to reinterpret it and use it in its own way. So it's no surprise that we hear that stockbrokers and bankers in the City of London are being given mindfulness courses. You might ask, well, is that so that they can be even more exploitative than they were before? That is, that mindfulness will help them to be efficient because they will be calmer and make better decisions in the whole rat race of globalization? Or is it actually a symptom of some sort of shift towards a more compassionate world? The idea of a compassionate City of London does sound like a contradiction in terms, but I mean, you see, but these are the sorts of contradictions you will expect. Bring mindfulness in and there's going to be a downside that it's going to get twisted into something else. On the other hand, how else could it be done? But by introducing it and providing an opportunity for it to be used for the good as well. We have to remember that mindfulness is connected to the way of life. And one thing that is at fault with the way that mindfulness is being used in some quarters, it is taken out of context. So it just becomes a technique, and that I think is dangerous. So we have to remember, it might come as a surprise to people in the City of London, that mindfulness is connected with right livelihood. So there are questions there about, is your livelihood harmful? Is it contributing to harm? So you put the mindfulness back in its whole setting, and then you get rather different answers. So I think when we teach mindfulness, if you end up teaching it yourselves in schools or whatever, remember to always put it back in its wider context, otherwise it will be misused and abused.
That's another thing about the mindfulness courses that you see everywhere advertised, like you're talking about. They just take the mindfulness and package it into an 8-week course very often.
Mm-hmm.
And people seem to think that, okay, you can buy that, you acquire it over 8 weeks and that's it.
That is a shortcoming that is being packaged and it's been sold as a commodity. What we are doing here, you'll notice, is completely different because you're not paying for it, it's not a commodity, and it connects with your whole way of life and with questions that are important to you, not the institution that you're working for. However, if this whole idea, this whole conception is to move into society, how can that happen without it making contact with these institutions in which we can have a debate about it? It's put on the stage in which people will then argue and disagree and get clearer or get muddier about what it actually means. But if it's not there, then how will that happen at all? So we can't isolate it and say, oh, it's only for we Buddhists. You see what I mean? But it has opportunity and it has danger at the same time.
I think that your talk a couple of weeks ago, the newcomers, was a perfect example of how you can take the bits from mindfulness that are really so factual or obvious and undisputed. So you give somebody an exercise and there's an actual result that pertains to their actual individual mind, and it's not something to be disputed. You could start with that, and there's plenty of it, and then as people get more and more developed in it, then they can question the more grey area where it's like, well, okay, well, how can I have my career and not have an element of focus and ambition, and how can I do this? But the more grey areas.
I've seen that happening actually. I remember the case of someone who was very interested in Zen and really wanted to do a Zen style meditation, and he was with us for a couple of years, and when he heard, started widening his understanding of the teachings, he came to question what he was doing at work. He didn't have a problem with it up until then, and he started thinking, well, I'm a graphic designer, I work for a cosmetics company, okay, but they're testing products on animals. And then he thought, well, I don't really want to do that. I want to be a graphic designer. And he actually went and worked for a charity. So he made that decision, as a result of, because if you had told him 2 years earlier you shouldn't be doing that, he would have rejected the whole idea. But it was like his mind had been prepared, perhaps through meditation, to consider it. So he made that choice. And nobody's imposing it. We don't go around lecturing saying you shouldn't be doing this, you shouldn't be doing that. We teach the mindfulness and the other things, and then people make up their own minds and change directions if they want to, and in their own ways, and to a degree which is acceptable to them. in a way, there are two questions here. One is about what it means for you as an individual personally. And I think we come here because we're seeking peace. And it's nice to be with like-minded people. Don't we? We feel I need the peace, you need the peace, you need the peace. So we're here for the peace, right? But at the same time, we know that we are constrained by society and by its institutions, our workplace, even our families. And then, we learn this here, and then we go back into the real world. The danger is that now you might, at some point, reject the teaching because you think, I can't apply it. It's unrealistic. Then it gets rejected. That's why it's important to have discussions like that, so we can kind of negotiate our way through and make sense of it together, because who is doing this in the present age? Very few teachers are really trying to engage these teachings with the reality of our daily lives. I hope that our attitude in New Buddha Way has not been one of demanding conformity, that we're trying to produce a standardized person that is sort of peaceful and wise, in the same way, because we all have different issues, and you're quite right that none of us here knows really what has happened to any of us or what we've done, or in some cases it could be really terrible. We're survivors, and we have to be sensitive to that as well. And as I've said many times, we don't generally go around bragging about the unpleasant things that we've either happened to us or been done to us or that we've done. That's not something that comes out to the open very often. We just tend to keep up a nice sort of self-image, and so in a way, in other words, we are concealing our suffering. But through meditation, in a way, it doesn't matter, because we're all doing the same thing in trying to let go of whatever the suffering was, or is, or will be. And I suppose this discussion gets into the institutional part, because one is just part of one's compassion, that it will somehow become generalized into society at large, because society at large seems to be just so misguided and self-centered and dreadfully destructive to individuals and to our children, to our future, to the animals and plants around us. It just seems to be destruction everywhere we turn. So, I think each one of us has to take from this what is important to us, and we're not expecting the same thing of every person. So we're not expecting that every person is going to go back to work and say, I'm handing in my job because of X, Y, Z. Maybe that's not the reason that you came here at all. That's okay. Raindrops are all different from each other, but it makes the rain. And you don't expect every raindrop to be exactly the same as every other. But taken together, it's either nourishing the soil and the plants, or it's not. And if the general drift of society is towards self-destruction, then self-destruction and misery is what it will get. But if the general drift is towards some cooperation, harmony, understanding, or long-term thinking, then that is what we'll get. So we just need to turn around in our thinking, whether it's on an individual level or any other level that you choose personally to take from what we're doing here.
New Buddha Way lets go of East and West and starts afresh in the life we have now. For more information, visit www.newbuddhaway.org.